Hello and welcome back to Wellywood Wargaming. My name is Damon and I'm back with another Black Library novel review here. This one, of course, we're going to be stepping away from Necromunda for a moment. I did manage to read quite a few books over the Christmas period, and this was one of the ones that I enjoyed the most actually. But we're going to be looking at an Astor Sabbathiel novel called Awakenings. Now this is a standalone Inquisitor novel, so of course when it comes to the 40k universe I've always been obsessed with Inquisitors, Inquisimunda in general, and anything to do with the modelling and lore and stuff that surrounds Inquisitors and the Inquisition in general. This book is interesting. If you're familiar with Dan Abnett's work, of course he is the kind of hero to a lot of people, certainly myself in terms of Black Library novels anyway. I do believe he's the best author, or at least one of them, on the current Black Library roster. You'll know him from doing the Eisenhorn novels, of course, the Ravener novels, and more recently the Bequeen novels as well. And I believe he did all the Gaunt's Ghosts novels as well, which of those there are plenty. But he's an excellent writer. This one is in the same sort of realm, so it's another Inquisitor called Astor Sabbathiel. She is of the Ordo Hereticus, which is the sort of witch hunters of the Inquisition. So there are different branches of the Inquisition, if you don't know. There's the Ordo Xenos, the Ordo Hereticus, and the Ordo Malleus, which are the three sort of bigger parts of the Inquisition. There are loads of other Ordos as well, but the Ordo Hereticus has always been my favourite. They're the more witchy hunter sort of looking ones. They usually have wide-brimmed hats, and they're particularly pious and devoted to the Emperor's light, I suppose. Anyway, so this novel is a standalone. I believe it came off the back of maybe a graphic novel or something else, but I don't really read graphic novels myself, so I'm not entirely sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. But Astor Sabbathiel has been, we're going to get into the story now a little bit. Again, these opinions and these views are my own, so you know, if you disagree with them, that's absolutely fine. Just please remember that they are my opinions. They don't mean anything other than my own, you know, thoughts, I suppose. So you might disagree with me, you might agree with me, but do let me know in the comments what you think of this one if you've read this book. It hasn't been out very long. It's one of the more recent Black Library novels. But as soon as I saw it, I thought, oh, an Inquisitor, I have to read about that. So I did, I picked it up, and away we go, really. So I read this book over the course of 3 days, I believe. I read it, I absolutely absorbed it very quickly. Not to say that it's a brilliant book, but I did enjoy it still. Now, there will be a few spoilers here because I'm going to go through the story a little bit there as well, but Astor Sabbathiel is a female Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor from a slightly older age. So she's been drifting in a warp storm in sort of stasis, I suppose, for 100 years. Very similar to Ellen Ripley in Aliens, who arrives in the beginning of Aliens, having drifted for 57 years or whatever, you know, and a lot's changed. So Astor, she wakes up and a lot's changed. Her former a former warband, I suppose, they're all dead except for one of them, who's been turned into a servitor or a gun skull, suppose, sort of thing. And she's been awakened and saved by an Adeptus Mechanicus sort of priest guy who's patched her up. She had a huge hole in her stomach and was on the verge of death. Anyway, he patches her up for no known reason, and she encounters another Inquisitor who basically doesn't trust her, but tasks her with a job of regaining her trust for the Ordo Hereticus, basically. And you find out that she's got a bit of a backstory. She basically 100 years ago went on a huge quest to discover that the Dark Angels, all of the Dark Angels, not just some of them, are all heretics, and as a result, all of the Marines, all of the Adeptus Astartes in the entire universe are also heretics as well as anybody who does anything with them. Of course, she wasn't particularly on track with that, and the Grey Knights did encounter her and were like, hang on a minute, love, you're a bit of a hypocrite here, and you're a bit of a Karen, and you've got your own demon host anyway, so I'm going to shoot you. So she gets shot with a storm bolter, and that's why she's been drifting in the warp storm for so long. Anyway, she gets revived, and it's all very interesting. She starts creating a new warband with a bunch of new people. She's got a sort of big, beefy sword maiden woman who's one of her sort of main fighters. She's got a lithe, stealthy sort of shooter woman who's got a sort of Xenos Gorse blaster. You've also got the tech priest himself as well. You've got a really annoying squat, actually, who I find just sort of the comedy relief of the entire book, who's just not my favourite character at all. And you've got a bunch of other characters, basically. I'm already forgetting about who's who. But she develops this small team of folks, and oh, actually, no, we've got Carlthonius Part 2. If you're familiar with the Ravenna books, Carlthonius is the interrogator for Gideon Ravenna, and this character here is very, very similar in lots of ways to Carlthonius. So that's kind of good, actually, because he's one of the best characters in this as well, the interrogator. Anyway, so what happens really is Astor Sabbathiel is framed for murder of another inquisitor pretty much as soon as she's woken up. So a few weeks after she's woken up, she's framed for the murder of this inquisitor by a very malicious and evil looking guy with a black sword and white hair and whatnot. And she's framed for murder and has to go on a sort of personal mission to figure out why and who and all that stuff. So there's some really cool stuff in this novel. I'm just going to cut straight to the sort of summary, I suppose. I don't want to give away too much because I don't want to give any spoilers away. But it's quite good. It doesn't have the level of detail that, say, Dan Abnett has. I mean, it's very much faster and a little bit more fluid. It's got more action in it, but it is definitely a sort of spy espionage kind of novel, I suppose. In a lot of ways, it's definitely a sort of a thriller, I suppose. But Astor herself is an interesting character. I don't feel like she's been fleshed out enough. Maybe that's due because I haven't read the graphic novel that's supposed to be before this. But I don't really know what she looks like. I don't really know that much about her other than the dreams that she has about being shot by the Grey Knights and stuff like that. And a lot of the characters I find just aren't really fleshed out enough. The one character that does have a little bit of life and a bit of a soul is the Carlthonius Part 2. I can't remember his actual name here, but the interrogator, who is actually quite fragile and quite sort of weak, but ends up being, the kind of hero of the whole thing, I suppose, in lots of ways. But he's a really interesting character. There's also another inquisitor with his own retinue of an Ogrin and another girl that he's got as well. The Ogrin's pretty cool. But we've also got assassins in this. We've got all sorts of stuff. That there's mentions of the Adeptus Custodes as well, and there's also mentions of the Silent Sisterhood as well. In fact, there is a Silent Sister that appears in this book. So it does feel a little bit... I don't know what the word is, but I think, if you compare it to, again, I can't help but compare it to Dan Abnett. I just can't because I'm so familiar with those books. But Dan would never bring a Silent Sister into a story, or something as rare as a Custodes just wouldn't be mentioned, because the scale of those books is so much smaller than the overall 40k universe, Something like a Custodes would be so rare, so unbelievably rare, that you would only ever hear a mention of it every now and then. So this book does contain a lot of stuff which I feel feels a little bit out of place, particularly being chased by a Calidus assassin or whatever it is. It's just seems a little bit far-fetched even in the 40k universe, but I still enjoyed it, don't get me wrong. On the whole, I think this novel is definitely a very enjoyable one. I think if you haven't read any other Inquisitor novels, this would be a really good one to pick up. It's an easy read, it's a quick read, you can devour it very quickly like I did in 2 or 3 days, and it's enjoyable, yeah. It's not perfect, it has a lot of things that are wrong with it, but nothing offensive, nothing really bad in it. I think it's overall a pretty good novel, I suppose. It just doesn't quite compare to the writings of Dan Abnett, and I'm definitely even more excited to get the 3rd book in the Bequeen trilogy now as well, just to round that whole Inquisitor saga off. But if you're interested in that universe, in the sort of Inquisitor world, then this is definitely a book that I would recommend you. I think you can plunge into that lore and discover a little bit more about it. It just doesn't have the same level of depth that a lot of other Black Library similar sort of novels do. So that's my 2 cents on the book. If I was to give it a mark out of 10, I'd say maybe a 7 actually, which a 7 or an 8, I mean, it's decent, I'm not the most generous person when it comes to giving actual ratings, and I suppose they don't really mean much either, but let's give it a 7. Let's give it a solid 7. And yeah, I think you should probably give it a read if you're into Inquisitors and 40k and the Grimdark universe in general. But that's it from me. I'll be back with another book review soon. I'm going to be reading another 40k novel, actually. In fact, I am reading another 40k novel, one that's actually in the sort of like top sort of 10 all-time list, so that'll be cool. I'm not going to tell you which one it is, but I'm enjoying it so far. And then I'll be coming back and probably doing all the Horus Heresy novels at some point as well, because I have read them all. As well as all of those Dan Abnett books that I was talking about as well earlier. But that's it from me for now. Please do like, share, subscribe, and check out my Patreon as well, and I'll be back with another video real soon. Peace out.